Pusuba, Nipata, Unto in the Revolution in the Pusuba, you are returning. Did you pass Janilla? So
Atiśa, Shantideva, and so forth, they were born into a situation where they had a lot of conveniences, a lot of enjoyments, wealth, and so forth. However, at a certain point in their lives, they decided to leave all of that behind and focus on cultivating something else, right? So there has to be an important reason behind why they did that. So what they saw is that if we talk about real stable happiness, really perfect and inexhaustible happiness, this type of happiness cannot be achieved through the activities of samsara alone, through engaging in samsara alone. And that is the reason why they left things behind to proceed towards something different. Didn't it?
That's it. Yakoro Jabi Pogre, and a Koro Jabo Kilera, which has all Genella, and it at the Swina, which Jabo to Tesuak.
So in terms of the story, in terms of the story of Shantideva, it is said that actually he was a prince, and so it was sort of on the eve of his coronation. In other words, he was going to go through the ceremony to become the king the next day, and it was right at that moment, kind of right before he was to be king, that he decided to give all of that up. So at this point, in fact, Shantideva had already promised to his father that he would take the responsibilities as king over, and in fact they had prepared a vast ceremony for his consecration, for his inauguration as the king. But what happened is that the evening that was to happen, he fell asleep and had a dream. And in that dream, the Buddha of wisdom, Mañjuśrī, appeared to him and told him that the appearances of samsara have no essence and so forth. And in this way, he kind of changed his mind. And so leaving his kingdom and his responsibilities behind, he decided to go to the great monastic university of Nalanda, and there he became a monk and he studied.
And
it is said that Shantideva, of course, there were many teachers at the monasteries, but none of them were really a particularly main teacher to him, because he already had this relationship with Mañjuśrī, with the Buddha of wisdom, as his principal teacher.
But
because of this connection, his behavior was a little bit different. His outer behavior was a little bit different from some of the other monks. And the other monks at Nalanda actually criticized him as somebody who wasn't serious about engaging in study and practice. And so actually it came to the point where his brother monks, they actually came to the decision to expel him from the monastery. And so many of you know the story that kind of on the eve of his when he was to be expelled, actually they sort of set him up to give a teaching, but actually that strange circumstance became a cause and a condition for him to preach that well-loved text, the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, the guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life. And so there was also a debate at Nalanda and also subsequently as to whether this text of the Bodhisattva Charyavatara has a 10th chapter or not. So actually what had happened was that Shantideva, the story goes, he began to levitate actually. They built, so the Konso Shukji Topo di la Tenero di Chiklaugaremato.
Yeah,
So I said to Geshe, I just want to share with you that, because it'll give some context. So they built a really high throne for Shantideva to sit upon when he gave this teaching. But the throne was so high that he wouldn't really be able to get up there. So they did this to humiliate him, actually. But what happened was, kind of through his powers of meditation, he was able to get atop of that throne. And then as he was teaching the subsequent chapters of the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, the story goes that he ascended into the sky. And so as he was reaching the conclusion of teaching the 9th chapter on wisdom, right, of the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, it is said that, like, he was no longer perceptible. It was as if he disappeared like a rainbow into the sky. So Geshe was explaining that this is why the 10th chapter is not... Yeah, there's a debate.
So the
Devas, those in the Deva realms, they were said to be able to hear this 10th chapter, but to the beings like us, they weren't able to hear it. And so they were kind of asserting that there were only 9 chapters.
Oh, tani ta jima la ta tini la sa ita nalenda pa ko ya me ita kawandu sa ta jewa she ge de la jima la ya ga lo lo yo ba de ya se chimo shwala
ya se shwa lo la peso. And so of course after this incident, he also was kind of disappeared from Nalanda Monastery. So the monks at Nalanda, they were wondering where he is, and Geshe explained that actually he was discovered to be in the southern part of India. Nalanda's in the north, right?
Yeah, tani te ko ga is mani pa ipet. Den reshiga tundi was nalanda ne pa.
Tsuyong ya wachi.
Tsi peru jena tsi den reshiru chis. Ka se tsi mabe ba yena shenju chembol le ga ka se jwa yo tu me.
So Nalanda sent 2 representatives to where Shantideva was dwelling in the south, and they said to him, you know, please come back to Nalanda, right? But at minimum, if you don't come back to Nalanda, please kind of settle for us whether there's 9 chapters in your Bodhisattva Charyavatara or 10.
This one, that and reaching the leg, then it's a payment to us over that carina. Tania, you know, she will leg about yours voice.
And so Shantideva said, I'm actually not going to go back to Nalanda. So he refused that offer, but he also confirmed that there are 10 chapters in the text of the Bodhisattva Charyavatara. And so it is through the kindness of masters such as Shantideva that we're able to study these teachings for developing love, for developing compassion, and for bringing forth the wisdom realizing emptiness. And so in particular, when we talk about the method side of the teachings, the instruction on the equalizing and exchanging self and others, this is a close lineage because it is said to have gone from the Buddha to Mañjuśrī, and then from Mañjuśrī directly to Acharya Shantideva. Yeah, and so Geshe said that in terms of sharing this, he just wants to connect this with the idea of Didang Gelwa Dabu Chagres Kandislaki. Sabo Kogiman to Sasatanta.
Nato Tenedo Rodo Zoga Mares, Tenda Deshi Zote, no need to give at Ashiku Ares.
So we don't. I didn't know where he was going with that. Sorry. So just had to check. So we don't have to give up our wealth, our enjoyments, nice things to eat and drink and so forth, right? But we should be developing at least some of our time to cultivating these inner conditions of happiness. Yeah, so for us as ordinary ones, of course, those outer conditions of having a nice place to live, of having enough to eat, enough to drink, those basic necessities, actually that's going to be quite important, because without those basic necessities in place, it's going to be really hard for us to study and practice the Dharma. But we also need to nourish our kind of those inner causes the mind, right? So we need to give the food, give the proper nourishment to our mind, and also focus somewhat on developing that.
오다 세 시와지도 세 렐레지 그거야. 해서 될 바지 시게 될 시와도 개바니 바지 시게야.
And in order to be able to do that, we need a mind that is both relaxed and clear. And in terms of the obstacles to a mind that is relaxed and clear, they are known as laxity and excitement.
오다 시와 파피야 될 좀바도 니지도 존주세 폐조조 그렇게 다 좋아요 게지나. 폐조조 소노토니 파 비야 조지데 대지지게야.
And in terms of kind of laxity, which it's also given as kind of mental sinking, is another way that's translated. In terms of that laxity, how we're able to kind of cultivate the antidotes to that is through thinking of the benefits of the minds we're trying to cultivate, such as love, compassion, bodhicitta, and so forth.
오다 대 오다 나 그렇게 녀래 여기 속은로도 쪼데레스 드리소노 돈에 다시 와봐 이노요레스.
And so if we get really gonda the Chingwa nganso opinion samlo tanda medro. And so if we think about the benefits again and again, if we become convinced of the benefits of the mind that we're trying to cultivate, this will get rid of that laxity or that mental sinking.
다 시와 카디 파피야 될다 릴라고 돈에 다 안줘서도 시나 다 그렇게 소소를 야시와 뭐 용거 와스 지와 라바요 참모요 레비칼 카디 파피야 될라 단담으로요 아레스.
And so, of course, laxity has different manifestations as well, right? We can talk about coarser manifestations of laxity, and we can talk about more subtle manifestations of laxity. And so there are actually a lot of other antidotes in addition to thinking about the benefits, which try to, especially these coarser forms of laxity, just sort of push them right out of the mind. And so one of them, and Geshe said he's shared this before, but it's been a while, so he'd like to share this meditation, this visualization with you again. One of them is you imagine that your mind is in the form of a white sphere of light at about the heart level. And so what happens is you recite the syllable pe, and this pushes the sphere of white light representing your mind up through the central channel, out of your body, and into the sky.
오다 세도년도 그 류이나래 오다 간담마다 저와도 노돌아서 봐 강가파 야야와 노지타 노카든 딘르바 야송 송바지
할라네로
페세르페.
Yeah. And so then one imagines that as one expels this, then all of sort of the stale winds, the discursive thoughts, and so forth, any distractions, that these eventually are going to dissolve into the vastness of the sky or space.
오다 디명아세 오다 명아세 주요로 와서 오다 든지지는 파 지와비야 이네레 다 류가 강에 여기 이네레 가렐리나 페도 침버서도 왔어.
So when we have kind of sort of this sinking mind, when we have sort of stale winds, or when we have kind of heavy feeling, distracting thoughts, this meditation can be very helpful.
오다 든지고 든지시와 단답비 토마소는 버게 토하기 워셔차 마소나 니가 질 뇨레제이드 파자네를 사기워도 달류조마요살 단도지 같이 말해스.
And so when we're engaging in intensive practice and experiencing heavy levels of laxity or mental sinking, these kind of meditations can be an antidote to that. And if that doesn't work, it's actually said that one is supposed to take a break. One should set the session aside, and one should, for example, go out into the environment, seek a vast vista, a vast view, and do things like that in order to kind of prepare the mind. So this is one of the methods for getting rid of that laxity or that mental sinking.
오다 손지기 오다 개파티가 저다 간지시기 열선 빼나 손지기 빠바이나 가져바이나 오 개파티가 빠지시 못지기 열레스.
And so the next one, so we talked about the obstacles related to laxity. So the next one are the obstacles related to excitement. 팔라디 간데스레.
오다 알냐 아tumbo 가져서 하고서.
가져서. Yeah.
오 빼나 손지기 빠바 걸어 손지기 빠바레 걸어 빠르지 뭐지 손지산이 타마 진행이 열 수시시기 열어왔어.
And so related to the story about mental excitement, Geshe would like to tell the story related to the Buddha. So after the Buddha had achieved enlightenment and begun teaching, the Buddha's father and another assembly of people from the courts, they arrived to listen to the Buddha preach the Dharma. And actually, as those beings received more and more teachings, among them, in fact, were kings of other kingdoms besides the Buddha's father. Those other kings, they were able to realize emptiness and so forth, to develop that kind of wisdom. But the Buddha's father, actually, he wasn't able to bring forth that emptiness or to bring forth any realization.
And so
the mental excitement, right, was that, of course, the Buddha's father, right, he was listening to the Dharma, but because he had kind of strong feelings of affection for his son, or this strong kind of father-son bond, right? Those feelings of affection actually distracted him from listening to the teaching. Sumaji, chokshigi Ale, loso. Konso sange gi dunla yot sange gi pala sange tongtu gi mendes. Ale, sungshula yongmi chodabuchi. And so the Buddha, of course, being clairvoyant, he knew this problem that his father was facing. And so actually he called upon the help of the four directional protectors, right? The protectors of the four cardinal directions. And the protectors of the four cardinal directions, they allowed all of the disciples to come and listen to the teachings, but they blocked the Buddha's father from entering the teaching site. And of course, the Buddha's father was very upset. He's like, I'm the Buddha's father, you know, like you have to let me in. And they actually said, we know that you're the Buddha's father, but actually you haven't brought forth any realizations. So you haven't really gotten to where you need to be in order to attend the teaching. And from that incident, the Buddha's father reflected, and he kind of reduced his pride and so forth. And in this way, he was able to once again receive the teachings and actually come to a good level of understanding. So in terms of ourselves as meditation practitioners, it's important to really be able to identify these hindrances of laxity and excitement. And it's also important to be able to understand what we have to do when we experience laxity and excitement, what the antidotes are.
And
so Geshe is just saying that having gone through this, then we need a mind, as we said, that is stable and peaceful. So let us take a moment to cultivate that. We want our mind to be like a vast ocean on a day without any wind, still and peaceful. Think the nature of our mind is pure luminosity. It is like a perfectly clear mirror which can bring forth any object. So think you breathe ha onto the mirror, And just as the condensation of your breath dissolves into that final point and disappears, any meaningless thoughts, discursive thoughts, unpleasant feelings or distractions that may be disturbing you, these slowly dissolve. And so think that at about the heart level, our mind is abiding there in the form of a sphere of brilliant, clear white light. And as we recite Pe, that sphere of light goes up our central channel and leaves our body into the sky, into space. Pe. And so we recite Ha, and we imagine that that sphere of white light, it dissolves and becomes completely inseparable from the sky. And in this way, our discursive thoughts, doubts, disturbances, distractions completely fall away. And think in this way, having dissolved away all of the discursive thoughts, distractions, unhelpful thoughts and feelings, that the mind is now still and at peace. So think on the basis of this mind's clear and pure nature, then I will bring forth minds such as love and compassion, which will help me to achieve all temporary and ultimate happiness. In order to be able to do this successfully, single-pointedly, I request the holy beings for their blessings. So we'll begin with the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. Okay, Geshe wants to go quicker, so we'll go quicker. Bala chazelo jede gyabsu ji demba chonden de dejin sheba da chomba yanda ba zobe songere ba dang shatsu demba dewa sheba jiden chemba chebu dewe kablo jor lana me ba la dang mi nangi demba songje chonden de be jawa shakya tu bala chazelo jede gyabsu ji Chomba chomden de dejin sheba dra chomba yanda ba zobe songye reba dang shatsu demba dewa sheba jiten chemba chebu dewe kalo gyorba lana meba ladang mi nangi demba songye chonden de be jawa shakya tu bala chase lo chede kyabzu chi. We'll do the mandala offering. And quickly as well. Saji Bege Jeje Medo Chan Rija Linji Nide Kempa De Sangye Shindu Mide Bowa Ge Jogu Nanda Shin La Che Par Sho Idam Guru Ratna Mendala Kam Niryata Yami. Refuge in Bodhicitta. Chedan sogi chenam la jangchu bardu dani kyasu chi dagi chenyen gibe sunam ki jola benji sangye joba shu. Chedan sogi chenam la jangchu bardu dani kyasu chi dagi chenyen gibe sunam ki jola benji sangye joba shu. Chedon sogi chenam la jancho bardo dani kyabsu chi dagi chenyen gibe sonam ki jola benjir sangye jobar sho. And so a brief contemplation about the motivation. Let us. So contemplate that every sentient being that I can gaze upon, every single one is connected with me, has been kind to me, and therefore I want to, and also will act as the cause of my happiness.
Nikaga deshi, tatu deshi kanga, tan yusateta, roa senjeseati, kanga zachimo somebody.
In terms of being able to achieve both my temporary and my ultimate happiness, it is my interactions with others, my connection with sentient beings that is partly enabling this. Therefore, they are very precious.
So think
also, for the sake of all these beings who have been so kind to me, I must definitely achieve the state of Buddhahood. So bring forth the mind of bodhicitta.
Soma nuji tende jo togre, kare seneta, se yinere, da, nyemo yinere, ronjinze yinere, demba chabaji yamare, so much.
So, we can also think, just as I have aspired to do, I can definitely accomplish. Why? Because the mind, the afflictions, and the self-cherishing attitude are all completely free of any inherent existence.
Shojuji se yinare, ota, shomba, niji, kare yina, tende yung togre, koroso demba chayo marwas.
Similarly, definitely bodhicitta, love, compassion, and so forth can be brought into the mind and flourished, because they too lack any stable, inherent existence.
Oda Atiśa kanu didisimbe kechache rawa desai oda trizo nyanga zo ngel zo chite ta jawa to chema page chachi kuwa chachi chenela ta tanda chachi chawares oda ta paji yopo chase nduas oda kale ta hale bitne ngamanuji pita pota ngaraso chitu kare na page ngamanuji getne page motoyaji.
So then next, we're going to do a short recitation of the mantra and the praise of the medicine Buddha. And of course, this is dedicated to His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. So His Holiness came out of knee surgery, I believe it was Friday, so a couple of days ago. And the message that was given was that the surgery went very well. So we'll just recite these praises and mantras, dedicating that His Holiness the Dalai Lama will be able to recover completely, so that his physical capacity is completely as before, and he will be able to continue to teach the Dharma, to turn the wheel for the benefit of beings, just as he did before. So we can see that in terms of his activities to benefit the teachings, in terms of His Holiness's activities to bring happiness to sentient beings, that he is like a sun in this world. And so for this reason, right, it is actually very meaningful to pray that he abides a long time and in very good health. So if we look at His Holiness's activities then, in terms of his activities to those who are practicing the Buddha Dharma, right, it has brought tremendous faith and tremendous harmony amongst the different traditions of the Dharma. And when we look at those who don't believe in the Dharma, or perhaps in any faith at all, we can see that His Holiness is unparalleled in being able to provide those ones as well with tools to find mental peace and happiness. So in this way, his activities are unfathomable. So recollecting that kindness and the benefits of His Holiness being in this world, then in this mood, let us recite the verses of praise to the medicine Buddha, and we'll also recite a few mantras. So I sent the paper that we're going to use, hopefully, so just wait to give it a moment. Yes, excellent. Thank you so much. So Geshe and I will recite in Tibetan first, and then we'll go through the English together. Tuje kula nyombe chomde nde tsenzam tebe ngendro dungese dusu nesim sangye menge la bendo yai la choselo Chomdende dejin sheba dra chomba yanda bazo be sangye mengi la benduria huji gyabo la chazelo chude gyabsu chi Blessed One, with equal compassion for all, whose name, when merely heard, dispels the suffering of the lower realms, dispeller of the three sufferings and disease, I prostrate to the medicine Buddha Vaidurya light. Homage to the Blessed One, the thus gone one, worthy, perfect Buddha, by Sajya Guru Vaidurya Prabharaja. I make offerings to you and take refuge in you. So we'll recite the long mantra once and then the short mantra a few times. Om Namo Bhagavate Bekenza Guru Bedurya Prabharajaya Tathagataya Arahate Samya Sambuddhaya Tayata Om Bekenza Maha Bekenze Ranza Samungate Soha Tayata Om Bekenza Maha Bekenza Ranza Samungate Soha So just recite to yourself. Maha Bekenza Ranza Samungate Soha Teadon bekenza bekenza maha bekenza bekenza randa samangate so. So we'll recite a brief dedication in Tibetan and then in English. Gewa di nyudu da membe gyabo jojone jowa chi kya malu pa de sala go pa sho. Through these virtues may I attain the state of medicine Buddha and lead every being without exception to that state. Oh, Jisunki.
Oda kazi tang anzo soros nole na ma so ta te mi sen che sa se no sa ya ka chim ro was on te la te nga ma ta ja to ji cham zom bele ka wa ina yo pe ne la oda pe to yung ja chim yung ya te no ji ma go pa na yo ma chi so to kres.
So as we Geshe really encourages you, if you have time, to recite these praises and the mantra, especially at home. And of course this will allow yourselves to accumulate merit, which is excellent, but also to pray that His Holiness the Dalai Lama is able to recover completely and to, as before, be able to continue without obstacle. We can see all the places in the world that he traveled and benefited. May he be able to do that again and bring benefit to this vast world. So this concludes the preliminary activities. Now to the main session. And so we'll actually turn first to the Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment by Lord Atiśa. And so if you're following in the English, we are on page 6 and I believe on verse 19.
And
so one of the things we mentioned is how this bodhicitta kind of starts off and increases. And we mentioned that bodhicitta is first brought forth into the mind as kind of a mere wish. So we call that mere wish or mere aspiring bodhicitta. And so we can say that it's easy, right, for that mere wish of bodhicitta to appear in the mind. So that's easy, but because it's not so stable, it's also easy for it to dissolve from the mind as well, right? So that's the paradox with that. So the next one, right, after that mere wishing or aspiring bodhicitta is the aspiring bodhicitta with the promise. And the aspiring bodhicitta with the promise is firmer, right, than that previous one.
And so this aspiring bodhicitta with the promise, you can take this actually with a ritual, short words of a ritual to make the promise. And then once one has developed or brought forth that aspiring bodhicitta with the promise, one is supposed to pay attention to two sets of 4 things to prevent the degeneration of bodhicitta. And so these 2 sets of 4 are presented as 4 things that we need to sort of cultivate to prevent bodhicitta from degenerating, and also 4 things that we should abandon to prevent our bodhicitta degenerating, especially in future lives. So one of the things that's really important, right, if it seems that it's difficult to bring bodhicitta forth, is to remember actually that the rewards are great. Bodhicitta is the supreme basis for the accumulation of a vast ocean of merit. It is also the supreme basis for the complete purification of our negativities and obscurations. Jangchugi semdi And so then if we want to increase our happiness from day to day, from month to month, then actually the best way to do this is bringing forth bodhicitta. And also if we pay attention to these 2 sets of 4, then our elements will be in balance, our mind will be happier, and we'll go from happiness to happiness. neremanduas.
And if we develop a real kind of taste for these trainings, right, a happiness will come in our mind. And, when we hear that we have to accumulate 3 eons merits in order to achieve enlightenment, that can feel like a very long time. But if we have this aspiration and we train in those factors that bolster it, then even if it's 100 eons until enlightenment, we'll be able to, work that amount of time very happily. So actually we think like of how many kalpas, how many eons that we have spent in samsara being unhappy. So if we have to work for 3 eons or for 100 eons towards a true and lasting happiness, right, then that's actually something quite good.
아고서와 페라이 데네 대왕도와라 세시스시 질륜저 자세 첨부 샤와라 그 순간도와
세시 주루주스나
세트다 다니엘 마타는 노사고 말와 세 요바지나
yeah
스질루그레 레로사고서고 말해
and so then there's this exhortation disure shiwalarwa. They're saying that when one brings forth bodhicitta, one goes from happy rebirth to happy rebirth, from happiness to happiness, all the way until enlightenment, having comprehended the benefits of bodhicitta. O lazy ones, why do you not cultivate it? Yeah, so we had some problems. It's probably mostly due to me in terms of the language of these 2 sets of 4. So Geshe asked me to kind of look these up in sort of a very clear presentation. So I found a presentation. So Geshe is asking me to read those to you in English. So I'll read them to you. So the 4 trainings: number 1, to recollect the beneficial effects of bodhicitta; number 2, to generate bodhicitta 6 times a day; number 3, to not mentally abandon any sentient being or working for their benefit; and number 4, to accumulate positive potential or to accumulate merit continuously. Then the next set of 4, to prevent the losing of bodhicitta in future lifetimes. These are 4 things that we have to give up rather than cultivate. The first, lying or deceiving to your abbot, teacher, or worthy being. Number 2, causing others to regret the virtuous actions they have done. Number 3, speaking harshly and angrily to someone who is a bodhisattva. And number 4, being hypocritical and false or misleading sentient beings. So those are the 2 sets of 4. So actually, if you've made this kind of practice of aspiring bodhicitta with the promise aspect of it entails training in those 2 sets of 4 things. Yeah? And actually, if you practice these 4 from the future lifetime point of view, even from the time that you are a child, you will have a naturally loving and compassionate nature and be working towards the benefit of others. But when we talk about realizing bodhicitta, right, the actual kind of true realization of something like that, that's not going to come about suddenly or quickly, right? And so now we actually come to verse number 19, as I mentioned, on page 6. And this is the point where the text begins to talk about engaged bodhicitta, or the bodhicitta with the vows. Chugurwa, Jugsem dani dompa matongwar.
You said dani domba mato pararasa yonta member pewan jamayi zubi shonchu member pen depi t-shirt maybe nana.
So, without the actual vow of engaged bodhicitta, your perfect aspiration will not develop further. With the wish to develop perfect enlightenment, make effort to take the vow in full.
So this
is an exhortation, right? Geshe said, very simple verse, an exhortation, really saying that one should take full bodhicitta with the vows. So it's really clear that even if one has brought forth the mere aspiring bodhicitta as well as the aspiring bodhicitta with the promise, if one does not take the next step and do the practice of engaging bodhicitta together with taking those bodhisattva vows, then one will not be able to fully ripen one's continuum. In other words, one will not be able to progress fully.
다wana 쇼지세비 domba ya lemba le goyo나 ane lembi tetelta kandikanisi yoares.
So then there comes a question, well then if we need to take the bodhisattva vows, what is the suitable basis? What basis do we have to have that makes one suitable in order to receive them?
소소 타와 리 드제 또도 도제 뎀바 라 쇼지 sembi domba yi kawa ye ji ye domo.
So we come to verse number 20, which explains this. Only those who continuously maintain one of the 7 types of individual liberation or pratimoksha vows or other vows will have the fortune for the bodhisattva vow and no one else.
당한도 주도 차고 진행 로지 자체 뭐 마치는 친들이래 도서나 원노이냐 같이 보여래.
So if one has not studied widely and reads this verse and just takes it literally without reflection, there's actually a danger you could fall into a misunderstanding here.
소소타와 리디 세아데 게노 파마니 게스 파마니 게로마 아니 녜네 게녜 파마니
Yes.
디텔라
Yeah.
아니 소소타비 리디가다
So when we talk about these 7 types of individual liberation or pratimoksha vows, what are they? So they are the vows of the Getsuls and the Getsulmas, the novice monks and the novice nuns, the vows of the Gelongs, the Bhikshus, and the Gelungmas, the Bhikshunis, the fully ordained monks and nuns. And then there's a vow for those who are called Gelukma, which is probationary vows, sort of in between novice and full ordination for nuns. And then we have the vows of Upasakas, who are the male lay vow holders, and the Upasikas, who are the female lay vow holders. So this is a total of 7 classes of vows of individual liberation.
다오나 소소타와 리디는 얘네게 domba 저거면들한테 가르쳤었어. 너무 말해서.
And so then somebody might ask a question, well, what about those who are one-day vow holders? There's a tradition where you can take some precepts for one day. Are these not included in this enumeration of 7? So they're not included in this list of 7 because you only keep them for a day. So Geshe said, keeping the vows for a day, it's nice, but it's not such a big deal. He's joking. He's joking. But actually, the answer, the Geshe said he's kind of kidding, but the answer to the question is there's often an enumeration of the 8 types of vows of individual liberation, and in this enumeration of 8, the one-day vows are included. So those who just had the list of 7, right? We said it sort of humorously, but Geshe is just explaining that it actually is the reason. It's because those vows are kind of really ephemeral. You just take them as for one day, and so that's why some scholars don't include them in the list. So but Geshe said that there are scholars, and the names are escaping his mind at the moment, but there are scholars who propose a list of 8 types of vows of individual liberation, including this one-day vow. So the next question that we should be asking is, verse 20 says that one needs to have these 7 types of individual liberation vows. Otherwise, one does not have the basis for receiving the bodhisattva vows. So is that the case, that unless you have one of these 7 types of vows of individual liberation, you can't receive the bodhisattva vows? So some people take this literally, and actually that is a mistaken understanding, because it is not the case that without the vows of individual liberation you cannot receive the bodhisattva vows. That's actually a misunderstanding. Because actually even those who do not possess any of the classes of the vows of individual liberation or pratimoksha, they are actually able to take the bodhisattva vows. This is clear in the commentaries.
다 다는 단도데 매잘란데 와서 때때 체바지를 고레스.
So why does verse 20 say that we'll have only those of the seven who hold the seven types of individual liberation vows have the fortune for the bodhisattva vows? That's saying that actually those who hold these seven types of vows of individual liberation are the ideal basis. It's speaking about the ideal basis, but it's not to be understood, Geshe said, in an exclusionary way.
다 소소 타바리 대동 리송아. 소소 타바리 대도 대지시비 시와라 초시에빠는 추이데 경로 동바다데 지.
Number 21. According to the Tathagata's explanation of the seven classes of vows of individual liberation, glorious pure conduct, celibacy is said to be supreme. Take therefore the vows of full ordination.
So it's saying
that out of the different types of these seven, right, the supreme basis for practicing the bodhisattva conduct is those vows that involve, it's actually not celibacy, it's brahmse, which is a Brahmin conduct, right? So those vows that involve Brahmin conduct, in other words, monastic vows, are said to be the supreme basis.
Verse
22. According to the ritual described in the discipline chapter of the bodhisattva levels, you should take the vow from a good, authentically qualified spiritual teacher. So if you want to receive the vows in the best possible way, then the discipline chapter of this text, the Bodhisattva levels, the Bodhisattva bhumis, it says that you should take them from a teacher who is well trained, especially in ethical conduct. Yeah. Verse 23, understand that a good spiritual teacher is one skilled in the vow ritual, who lives by the vow and possesses the patience and compassion to bestow it. So actually there needs to be a very good spiritual teacher, there needs to be kind of a proper vow ritual, and when all of these various things mentioned here come in place, the vow can be received excellently. And so it says skilled in the vow ritual, that means that they know how to perform this ritual easily. And in the previous verse, when it talked about it talks about one who lives by the vow and possesses it. Gonda sujum number dapa dene? And so the person who bestows the vows, the spiritual teacher, must also possess the bodhisattva vows themselves and do their best to abide by them. Because if the teacher hasn't received the vows and isn't trying their best to train in them, that's like trying to empty the contents of one empty vase into another vase. If both vessels are empty, nothing is going to pass from one to the other. So that's the reason. Domba mashugen domba nam.
Domba mekechiga ta domba nonela. Ta nyepa chimo shirare ma to domba to sivat ni yohare.
Jangji sembe domba e.
Ta jangji sembe domba ta karina domba. So
then Geshe was saying that actually there's a discussion with regards to these bodhisattva vows. I was saying you're opening a can of worms here, Geshe. There's going to be lots of questions. So there's actually a discussion when it comes to these bodhisattva vows that even if the preceptor, so if the one bestowing the vows has not received them and gives those vows to students, and those students think that they've received them, those students still receive the vows. Oh, so although it's regarded as kind of quite a grave sin, quite a grave fault for the preceptor to kind of be false in that way, by some understandings, the students do receive the vows actually. So there's actually a story relating to this, and perhaps on an occasion where there's time, Geshe will share that story.
Lama kanga lolo ta domba lene le page da chomba to cha waje. Lama korong ya su ne lu de ati ne loji chi ares.
연송래 알레 되네 공연송래 돈바 남기래 거
미미 거 닐 de roga서 domba no ikal mara ba.
알레 러서
domba ne ke domba no ne jama zone.
알레 되네
Mina lama ri domba to kor da chombi kombo to.
Okay. So there di ale di soso tabe domba roa.
Yeah.
So there's actually a story about this related to the pratimoksha vows as well. And the story goes that a Lama who hadn't received the vows and wasn't really properly abiding in them, he actually bestowed the vows of individual liberation upon a group of students. It is said that the result of that was that the group of students took the vows seriously and they attained the state of foe destroyers. But the Lama himself, he fell into the hell realms. So that was the result of that. So it's a little scary.
Yeah, Lama ri da chomba to hale che to le sare lama de kawandi ta lama to bang yang ya sol sadi.
And so it is said that actually when the students achieved the state of foe destroyers, right, this they also possessed some clairvoyance. So they were wondering, like, where is our Lama who bestowed the vows upon us? And then using their clairvoyance, they were able to identify that he was actually abiding in the hell realms.
Otang arasu ichi se de ate to deva se de ate halle wo ko pret ne mochi le so no woni pachim mochi isa ota chawa karina dogi ya.
Lama yapomena yanti da.
Yeah.
So in these cases, what happened was, despite the fact that the Lama was actually not a worthy Lama, because of the faith and confidence of the disciples in the vows and the trainings, they were actually able to receive the precepts. But of course, that's not an ideal situation. In fact, we should avoid that if we can. We want to seek a Lama who has received the Bodhisattva vows and also who has a good level of ethical training in those vows. And also we want a student who has good thoughts and affection towards his or her students, somebody who has patience and compassion, right, to bestow the vows and to train. And then there, as we come along, there is also the word patience here. So patience could also indicate that the teacher is willing to take the time to answer questions and doubts about the vows. So Geshe said when I kind of have to ask back questions to clarify something I didn't understand, he gets a fault from scolding me. It's okay. The scoldings really aren't that bad. It's not scary. Okay. So these are all the things in place that are needed for this ideal transmission of the Bodhisattva vow. In case, after searching for someone like this, you are unable to find such a spiritual teacher, I shall explain another ritual with which to properly take the vow. So, actually, with the Bodhisattva vows, if there isn't a Lama or a preceptor, a suitable one, to be found, actually, on the basis of identifying and reciting the correct verses to receive the vows and visualize doing this in front of the holy beings, you can actually take the vows yourself without a teacher. Okay, so the point here actually is that for the vows of individual liberation, for example, the vows of fully ordained and novice monks and nuns, you can't receive those vows in the absence of a preceptor. That's not permitted. But in the case of the Bodhisattva vows, and some even say the vows of secret mantra, it is possible to receive those precepts on one's own on the basis of the ritual and visualization. So many people, many great teachers give the advice that the first time you receive the Bodhisattva vows, this should be done in front of a preceptor, right? But that's the ideal rather than required.
다 된다 되니야 매와도 진짜前面권이나 다 될어버게 라그래 순간도 왔어.
And so, as we sort of engage in receiving the vows and training, one really needs to bring forth effort into the practice.
다 같이 뭐 된다 니리 가라 하고 가르세나 당기 매세 초가 조개 중앙에 아주 요바스.
Yeah.
매세 도자지 세아티가라 나 쇼주 조데 세시기 세시기 조체 데킬레기 요아레스.
So, just to go back a little bit, we mentioned something about the aspiring bodhicitta with the promise. So, this aspiring bodhicitta with the promise, right, the thought or the promise goes like this: for the sake of all sentient beings, I shall bring forth bodhicitta and shall not set it aside. I shall train in bodhicitta.
다 쇼주세비 dombikal이나 조데 드니 타 가리나 니테 강갈파게 타도는 반 로토와서 이
Juksemdi.
judo.
So the difference between that jukdom. So the difference between that aspiration with the promise and the engaging bodhicitta with the vows is when one does the engaging bodhicitta with the vows, one says, I will train, right, in the conduct and precepts of bodhisattvas. So that is the difference, right? Jukdom kepardi yangyarsundan?
시시워서 당겨 매색깔이나 조주 세시기 레송와스.
Yeah, par pangi me jangshi.
매매매 세시에서 수지 공부토비 타 강갈nga.
So the aspiring bodhicitta is like a promise to generate, to maintain that bodhicitta, and the engaging bodhicitta, in short, is to bring forth that bodhicitta and engage in the activities and trainings that will lead to that enlightenment for all beings. And just so that this is not empty words, right? When one makes these vows and promises, one imagines that the Buddhas and their children, the Bodhisattvas, the holy beings, are in the space in front as witness.
ஞான 배도체와 반 여보 마수나 녀바 첨어서
So receiving the vows is wonderful, and having received the vows, then for the real benefit, one must train in maintaining those vows. And if one can train in maintaining those vows and not breaking them, one comes to great benefit. But if one is careless and continuously breaks the vows, then one comes to great drawbacks.
어느 이제 야 뱀보테 니마질 소소 뭘 맞든 리마티가 뭐뭐가가 내딱 니마질 칼라 저기 찾아서 사와지
로스로스로
아무 강가래용 거로 왔어 칼라사가
야야
달래서 소나 칼라지 좀 맞을 파도 잡아이나
알레
다 건서 관계 잘로는다 만다 라그래 거로라 아고서로 거로야 할래비들 내가 두자로 왔어
여보디로
야보이나 뱀보테.
So there's an example given of, like, we could say like a king, or maybe these days Geshe we would say like a leader, like a prime minister or president or something. If they said that, all of the poor and destitute people in this area, I'm going to provide them, I'm going to offer them a healthful meal, and they should all come at a certain time. If having made that promise, all of the people assembled to receive the meal, and the king ends up not giving them anything, right? Then those people are going to be disappointed, and they're going to criticize and say bad things about the king.
다 할래비 야비야 야보코르 야보이나 뱀보이나 세이나 다 코로 할래빌라가 두자로 와서 좀 맞춤모치래 다 할래비네 두자레스.
So and people are going to criticize, saying, this king or this leader is a bad leader. It's someone who makes promises and doesn't maintain them. It's somebody who kind of like doesn't honor their commitments that they made towards others, right? They will not be viewed in a positive fashion.
다 대코로버게 내지지로 와서 다 내지 야대고 첨모치래 셔도로와 다 단다데 델레조다는 손주도 전에서만 요조버게
So that's one way, right, that we can think about the effects of not honoring a promise, right? But when one receives the bodhisattva vow, it's even heavier than that, because one has made this promise, calling upon all of the Buddhas and bodhisattvas to bear witness to that commitment.
어다 된대지 어다 대지 시비도네 가제도 소소세 버게 자 뒤쪽에 내지지 시주 버게 수와지 가제 야 놀라지 그 알았어.
주제다 니슈사축 그래 숨쉬소 죽으로 Sorry. So then one has to familiarize oneself with the 18 branch and the 46 subsidiary, with the 18 root and the 46 branch bodhisattva vows, right? So you won't know those all from the beginning. So you have to kind of learn those and then train in trying not to break them. So if you think, gosh, like 18 and 46, that's a lot. How am I ever going to keep in track of that? Geshe would remind you of His Holiness the Dalai Lama's advice that says that one need not worry if one identifies and trains in self-cherishing being the main fault that one wants to abandon, and if one recognizes and cultivates cherishing others as the main quality that one wants to develop. Then one will naturally be abiding. And so now hopefully you understand a little bit about how the vows are transmitted and so forth. So we will leave it here today. So we are just after verse 24. So one of the nice things about the Bodhisattva vows is that with other vows you don't get to study them extensively before you take them, but with the Bodhisattva vows you're actually allowed to study them extensively before receiving them. But actually, according to tradition, the vows of fully ordained and novice monks and nuns, you're not allowed to study those before you receive them. So we can explain some of the reasons for why it developed that way at another. So we will now turn to the fifth Dalai Lama's stages of the path, which is with His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama's commentary. Sorry. So I just want to kind of bring you to the page where we are. Sorry, so I believe we are kind of midway down page 83 if you have the English volume of the text. But I will, of course, read it out as we go along. That's okay. Then, so we are on page 83, halfway down, Persons of Middle Scope. His Holiness's commentary. Then one holds as one's aim the abandonment of those afflictions that give rise to negative behavior through applying antidotes.
This way, what I'm going to
sorry. So we are just above that outline of persons of middle middle scope. So, sorry. Thus, when one begins refraining from negative behavior arising from afflictions, one has taken the first step towards liberation. So, Geshe just explaining that sentence, this is a decision, for example, to avoid the 10 non-virtues. So as we train, right, in avoiding the 10 non-virtues, sorry, losing my voice today, and practicing the 10 virtues, we should do this with a happy mind, understanding that the reason we train in this discipline is for the sake of our own happiness.
This one? Nyemo chichi is a sebi tawa nundin net shaji mi zuni nyemo nis yunje shiraja labaton di desheje dingenze lava di jete sutaje lavaji lava sunjo gone nyemo la nisa ane nyembo teni yuta cha lomte shivan dito tmoyin lonje ramba yembe
so as we go
lonje rembe nyole ngije 시분 지게 까는 조기.
So now we come to that section, persons of middle scope. Then one holds as one's aim the abandonment of those afflictions that give rise to negative behavior, through applying antidotes in the manifestation of nirvana, a separation in which afflictions are exhausted in the dharma dhatu. Taking these as one's goals through the three trainings of wisdom that directly purifies afflictions, concentration that generates it, and ethics that are the basis of that, one directly applies the antidotes to the afflictions. These paths of purification are the stages of the path in common with persons of middle scope. Therefore, the actual practice of the stages of the path is posited from the persons of middle scope onward.
그래서 어따 되지 그 야가로 야체도 원래 살단게 시우 중이 갈이나 당가로 시왕가마 되니네 제나 할 레비 갈레 뭐 자는 가로서 대자치 못 되요래.
So we're going from the small scope to the middle scope, but in terms of the practices of the small scope, we can see that previously we trained in those, right? Because one of the results of practicing the small scope is that one achieves a rebirth such as a human being.
어따 뭐야 저도 열어 뭐 보여 저 처전 돈 받아 봐. 하고 살아. 아니 저서 파시 주 그게 가서 터들려가 때문이요래.
And when we talk about the causes of a human rebirth, right? We talk about the principal cause as being pure ethics. But there are also other branch causes, such as training in the six perfections or paramitas and so forth.
어따 되는 거와도 멜로 그로 보게 로바 뭐 저기 따지 당간도 대자치 못 된도스.
And also making stainless prayers and dedications, and it is through all of these kind of coming together that we find ourselves with the basis of the human rebirth that we enjoy now.
어따 소속 대사 때문에도 많이 소속 멜로는 따와 놓지 다 한가서 시보야 소속.
So if you want to know whether you're using this opportunity of your human rebirth in an effective way or not, Geshe said, be a mirror to yourself. You know what your mind is like. You know the actions you are doing, so you yourself can answer that question.
어따 대서야 소속 따지러 다 하마까지 여바이나 다 거가도 뭐 요하러 왔어.
And of course, you know, in terms of improving this and so forth, we also have a lot of opportunities to be able to do that.
다 디툴 세 자체를 놓소나. 다 거와 요쪽 밤에 받지 마소나. 대신에 들어가고 뭔데 대이제 다 답이 되시지 저 근데.
So when one comes to the middle scope, one brings forth a little bit of a vaster mind that thinks that as long as I remain within samsara, right, within cyclic existence and rebirth, I will not be able to achieve a stable, lasting happiness. Therefore, I must achieve the bliss of moksha, of liberation from samsara.
어따 거기 루코이나래 루코 거와 노지 콜로 거와 노지 다 가디나 간간조 거와를 되는 되는 되요 알았어 가디나.
So our current situation, right, in samsara is a little bit like a fan that we use in the summer. It's just that kind of this continuous, incessant spinning around and around and around. That's our situation here.
다 조솔 가르가르 덴도도 가르가르 겐도도 들이 지는 다 꼬라자리 되요 알았어.
And you know, sometimes the fan blade is towards the bottom, sometimes it is towards the top. So sometimes we're in relatively pleasant circumstances in samsara and higher rebirth. Sometimes we're in very difficult and unhappy situations in samsara. That's the nature of the cycle.
나로서 나세대한테 보게주 콜롬 모원도자 주메 콜롬 모원도자 토쇼 거의 쓰zel라요 모원도자 알았어.
And so that we call the self or our I. If we look at this from the perspective of our countless previous rebirths, many times we have been reborn in the state of devas, of those godlike beings of the form and formless realms. Many times we may have even been in the very peak of samsara, the ideal realm within cyclic existence.
어달라이 자복은 뭐지 다 로시 부서수바다 던지가 거의 대화 못한다면 뭐 사와레스.
So we may have been like sort of the king, the principal among the gods, who is enjoying this ideal position within samsara and all of the attendant kind of very high levels of bliss and happiness that entails.
어다 디게 된다 가르 거의 대시가 거를 때 몸에 다 보게 지레스.
But that doesn't benefit us now. And reflecting on that is going to help us to come to the conclusion that samsara is not going to be a basis ever for a lasting, meaningful happiness that we seek.
어떤 내서 다 던지돌란 여와요 손이 좀벌리 대표가 될 자가를 리그 다시 여와 할래비 슈치 모르와스
Okay.
리도 던지 여와
Oh, los.
그래서
Yeah.
어다 손지 어떤 니 템바 될 리도 리그 던지 여와 때문에 시글로저도 녀래 여보 제탄 대야가
And so also to understand a little bit that these tools for happiness are available to everyone. So at the time of the Buddha, right, we had this system in India of Varnashrama Dharma, right? So Varna is often translated as caste. And so people were put according to their family of birth into these castes. But the Buddha said, the cultivation of my Dharma does not depend upon one's Varna or caste. The study and practice of my teachings is open to all.
어다 대지야 리지레 자리들 니레사 데코르타가 거인의 지기 지저와스
So these designations of Varna or caste, such as Kshatriyas and Brahmins, the warriors and the holy scholars, these are all kind of worldly designations in a way.
여보다는 가로서 강가 사이 잡아 먹어서 사스더니 배도 쉬면데
And these kind of situations that one is born into, if one doesn't do anything, that doesn't bring much benefit. We see that in our current circumstances, right? We already mentioned that we were reborn in the Deva realms, or even maybe as the king of the gods many times. It doesn't benefit us long term.
어다게 저 먹으면 된다 거의 제이 쪼어대다 단이야 녀모들인데 녀모티가 다 열어 뭐 쪼쪼대 말이 받도 앉아 말이 받으는데
So now coming to this middle scope, seeking liberation, we want to identify the cause of samsara. The cause of samsara is the afflictions or the kleshas, and amongst those afflictions there are many, but the main one can be said to be the ignorance grasping at the self.
빼나 거한테 간도 시 두기 신다고 침보질 빼줘 봐 이나스 아니 시가 야가도 로마르지 다 내줘도 건도도 가자도 타도르 지레디 말했어.
So if we look at kind of samsara as springing from a poisonous tree of the afflictions, then the trunk of that tree will be this ignorance, and then the various branches and leaves and so forth will be the attendant afflictions like attachment, anger, jealousy, pride, and so forth.
그래서 어다 짜와짜와데 단지 말이 봐 세하더래서 말했어.
But the root of it all is ultimately this ignorance grasping at the self.
어다 뒤짜와데 열라 강가 베베드 메바조게 쪼마조게 다 라바서 다 따다서 도야래서.
If we want to uproot this poisonous tree of the afflictions as well as get rid of all of the branches, how do we do this? We do this by engaging in the 3 higher trainings of ethics, concentration, and wisdom.
저쪽에 라바티가 리도셀 헬레시와 버게야 대세 강가 가레이나 버게 헬레시 소유하래서.
Through the practice of ethics, right, when we're not doing the negative, the mind becomes more peaceful and we become more steady, right? That's the fruit of the practice of ethics, pardon me.
가디나 노도 선도야 노도 수선도와 녀모라바 수선도 대티강가 관이데 헬레소 요하레스.
Through practicing ethics, right, we don't have as much doubt and suspicion and gonda luldegeresdene 펜토
선수야 저쪽에 라바티가 녀모라바 노도 차워도 대지강가 대서 거 아니라 세시와 헬레소 요하레스.
So we'll have less doubt, we'll have less forceful afflictions and regrets when we train in discipline, and in this way the mind becomes more peaceful and even with ethics.
다 띵엔저가 라바티 델리죠 다 당긴가 말 헬레티 대서 템보소 요하레스.
And then that peace that we experience through our practice of ethics, this will be kind of firmed up, bolstered by our training in samadhi, in concentration.
다 이나요 다 대존지가 다좀 말이 봐 거기에 배알레 때보다 지할 걸리라고 또 라가 말아봤어.
But ignorance grasping at the self is pernicious. It's not easily removed. So through practicing ethics and concentration alone, we won't be able to completely defeat it.
어다 뒤기 당게 요봤어. 어때 자완이 메바조게 다 시라가 라바티 다조 그 하레스.
So the tool which is going to allow us to dig down deeply and take the very root of this tree of afflictions, the ignorance grasping at the self. This is the wisdom realizing emptiness.
The
supreme wisdom is said to be that wisdom that directly realizes emptiness. It can uproot. When we look at how the afflictions unfold, we see that they are dependent arising. There is not an arising of the afflictions that does not come in dependence upon other causes and conditions. So when we talk about emptiness, that principle also has to be revisited here. Emptiness means empty of arising, of something arising in and of itself. Empty of something arising not in dependence upon something else.
So
if we think that the food that I enjoy today, any moment of happiness that I enjoy today, none of this arises in and of itself in a vacuum. It all arises in dependence upon something else. You're already starting to think about emptiness just by thinking like that. So things arise in dependence, so they are dependent arisings, they are dependently originated. This is that understanding cultivated through the lens of Kunzop Demparwa, relative truth. And then when we think from the other side of it, that there is nothing that can arise except in dependence, then we are looking more at the emptiness side of this picture of emptiness and dependent arising. So when you first hear it, this is going to be difficult. Geshe is explaining. This is going to be difficult, but what we want to do is think about it again and again, and we want to contemplate and study this concept because it's very important. So emptiness, right? Then we have in emptiness, we hear this word empty, but empty does not mean nothingness. It's not a complete absence. It is empty of arising independently in and of itself. It is empty of arising not in dependence upon something else. And this is the case for every findable phenomena, whether our happiness, whether our suffering, whether the food that we enjoy, and so forth. And it's actually said that if we develop a feeling for emptiness and dependent arising, then our method practices, one who seeks to develop love and compassion, these are actually going to arise much more easily as well. And so also when we contemplate dependent arising and realize these relationships of dependence, we'll have no choice, right, but to feel close to all sentient beings, understanding those dependent relationships. Lord Milarepa expressed this very succinctly, where he said, "From understanding emptiness, compassion arose." So we will, let me just mark where we left off so I don't forget. So we will close the session there. So we'll do some dedication prayers. I realize, especially folks in this part of the world, it may be a busy weekend for you, so if you need to continue with your day after the dedication, please do. But if you would like to stick around for question and answer, you are very welcome. Jongjo semjo rinpoche maje panam jejur chi chewan yamba meba yang gone gonde bewar shu tongni tawa rinpoche maje panam jejur chi chewan yamba meba yang gone gonde bewar shu Jambe Pao Jidar Kiamba Dong Kundu Zangbo Deyon Dejen De Deda Kungi Jesu Dalo Je Gewa Dida Tamje Radungo Desa shebe gyawa tangje ge ngawa ganglai choda ngabade dagi gewe tsawa dika kya zambo jeje rada ngawa.
로제 관계 겨와서 봐도 서반지 다 니발라 때네 다 조조 대다라 자와 도제 침바 어다 보게 단다 간다 샤치도 되지 간가 봐주 스타안네라 어다 튜그 어느 제고 가레이나 반주 바지.
So then, through the merits that myself and others have accumulated, we dedicate these to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, being able to have a completely successful recovery, and then being able to return unabated to his unfathomable activities benefiting beings.
어저 도제 침바 조 집에 다 된저 시부 돈바 다 물리들 서도 세이나 그세 때마다 두게 돼 강한 저 바지.
And taking His Holiness the Dalai Lama as the main example, but indeed all valid ethical spiritual teachers and all who are dedicated to the benefit of others, may they have good health and long stable lives.
실류 강같은 뭐 강같다 덤보도 썸바좀 보여보 열시해둬야지.
May all the religious traditions of this vast world find a way to abide in harmony, and in this way may there be peace and harmony within the world. So we'll pause there. Sorry. So let me just turn the volume up a tiny bit, and we welcome your questions.
Yeah, so you can unmute yourselves and ask questions. Go ahead, Annie.
I'm just curious a little bit about the Medicine Buddha mantra. Why we say Tadyata, since that is sort of like, for example, or it goes like this, and then say Benkense. Is there a special reason for that, since it seems to be just linking on to the previous part of the long mantra?
So, men lagi ngak seria de thaya tha om bekanza maha bekanza ranza samungate so ha yeres rwa thaya tha di khare chene yeres de dega de dabochi yeres ane di ngak ringpo di gi chashe mato dene di ngak tungtung rangla khare chene kyo gres ti sabomi donda di khare resa.
It's kind of,
Geshe said, dinda social stuff, which
yeah.
It's kind of a request, sort of do like this, kind of like asking for assistance is how Geshe is explaining it.
Okay.
Yeah. You can think of it almost as if you're like kind of talking to the medicine Buddha, like make it so, something kind of a little bit like that.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Yeah. This is kind of the situation, but you can think of it as in a way of like we're asking for help more. Yeah. So like in the Perfection of Wisdom mantra, it says Tayata gate para samgate bodhi swaha, right? So the Tayata sena? Yeah. If you're going towards Buddhahood, these are sort of the paths that you need to go through. So it's almost like this is what I need to be able to have help in the medicine Buddha mantra.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome, Annie. Anybody else?
We have a question coming from Facebook.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave. Thank you.
I've asked for clarification. I haven't got it, but we'll go with what's here.
We'll do our best, yeah.
How do you know how many times you have returned with a bodhicitta mind/nature? Not sure if this question is worded correctly to convey what I mean. How do you know how many times you've returned with a bodhicitta mind and nature?
So I got it, Dave. So I'm going to say what I understand, and hopefully the person who's listening... Oh.
Let me think. No, okay. No. Anyway, yeah, go ahead.
So Dave, I'm just going to say like what I understand out there before I translate it, and then if the person who asked, if he or she is not happy with what I say, just come back to us and we'll try to figure it out. So basically they're saying like, how do you know kind of how many, I think they're thinking in terms of rebirths, right? So how many rebirths have we been able to come back with continuing this bodhicitta intention? Is that what you understood, Dave? That's what I'm kind of understanding.
That's my take.
Okay. Perna nganso di jangcho gisem di kewa ne kewa drogi yores tabochi yores. Dene nganso korwa nangla nganso kandesla gore kewa trang mepa dabochi yores roa. Kewa dinso katsu jangcho gisem mu tune sur leb tu song kandes hako giresa.
Kandes hako giresa na pena nganso pogi chujika anela. Chewa shayel magawa. So
it's hard to say definitively, but Geshe would give you an example. Think about those small children who from the time of birth, they don't want to harm any being, even tiny insects, and they're sort of a naturally loving and compassionate nature and want to help others. That's an indication, right, that may have carried over from previous lifetimes. So we see children, right, who they might actually like to kill small insects or trap small birds and harm sentient beings and so forth. But we also see children who naturally try to protect the birds and even the smallest insects and try to avoid harming in any way they can. So in the latter case, that's a sign that perhaps they're carrying over some training in bodhicitta from previous lives. So you know, in traditionally in Tibetan families, you know, you would have a child who was maybe caring for the animals and the insects, and another one who was killing them. You know, the parents would say, oh, they have very different imprints from previous lifetimes, right? So that's how they would look at that culturally. And also that can develop as the person sort of matures into a natural liking for the training of love and compassion, and to easily being able to cultivate minds of love, compassion, and bodhicitta, right? So we can't say definitively, but that will have been a sign that one has trained in this in previous lifetimes. Loso. Mizan chambo. Kembodi roa. Loso.
Ani ina kopemboza magani kadi ina geo chizo ketani leso na matkenza tandi. Choro chijil karachiyo. Nyole karachiyo.
Le konso pumbo dabo chik ne so ke chambo joy then ko chugi kola So you know, signs of those cultivations in previous lives, they can manifest in different ways. Geshe was thinking of one of the abbots of the Jume monastery. So after he finished his Geshe degree, he did 1 year of tantric study at the Jume monastery. And this particular Kempo, this abbot, actually he was from quite an aristocratic family. And he was sort of the elder, so he was kind of expected to carry on those family responsibilities. But when people sort of came to him as a young man to do family business and so forth, he showed no interest in the business at all, but would always be asking them about what religious practices they were cultivating, their meditations, and so forth. And so actually, of course, because he was kind of the main heir of the family, he was expected to get married, which he did, and he also had 2 children.
tani ko konzo jil hasana wasa ta jiru mo chine jil kasa kala nenjisle ndiwas nenjisle ko halebi ngi chimbo shene tani ped rawasne te yares.
And so he went with his family on a pilgrimage to some different sites of Je Rinpoche Lama Tsongkhapa. And as he was going on pilgrimage, he actually developed a really strong, definite emergence or renunciation for samsara. And so he made arrangements for his family to be taken care of, and then he became a monk. He actually left behind those responsibilities.
Ta ina ko ro pe do chemer ji ta ngama pe yar was ta te ji no mach ba le ka uchi yares ta.
But because the situation of the family, I guess Geshe means financially was quite good, and because the children and the wife also had a liking for the Dharma, they actually rejoiced when he decided to become a monk.
O ta tendo ya te ji pere sa ko sa wa o ta po ya pa cha che wa che ya ka re ina ka tama ti shun do was.
So this is a sign, right, of a strong imprint within the mind. It could also be an imprint for bodhicitta, right? In circumstances that might even seem not ideal for it, one can kind of bring forth these kind of actions.
O ta sun ji hun do te na wa chi ro.
Yeah, and so of course the story of this Kempo, right, this abbot of Jume, is also very similar to the story of the Buddha, who we also know left behind a very comfortable life, right, to pursue the truth.
O ta ale di ji res.
So that looks like that's Geshe-la's response to that.
Ta pa cha manda wa che wa yo ke ta go jo nyo le zo gren u ka le lila wa ka jini page choa le ya ka le me ya ta tani ne tsna manda yo ngi was.
So on the basis of the bakchak, or the imprints of previous practices, right? As one cultivates, that cultivation, that meditation will unfold easily. This is another sign that one may have practiced that in a previous lifetime. So I think that's all that Geshe-la wanted to share about that.
That was the question.
It was? Okay, great. Okay, so I guessed correctly.
How do we know where we are?
Nanso kawayudame kandis hakogiresa.
How
do we know where we are? I guess they mean in terms of cultivating bodhicitta, right? Yeah. Nganso jangchub sempe ginyamnen kawayudame kandis hakogires. Ngaronso.
Me ta tedu so page ta ngama ga pache sheke. Yete pikala.
Yeah.
Te se nyondo was. Te jile pikal manyone tembo de yona.
Mikale kawada. So the best way is to confront a difficult person. Sorry, not to confront. That's the wrong word. To draw near to a difficult person and see if your love and compassion and bodhicitta are maintained. Then, if you're able to maintain that without them degenerating in the presence of that person you find really difficult, then you're pretty advanced. So that would be one way to know. Yeah, and actually this is a common Buddhist practice, but also of other religious traditions, putting yourself in a bit of a difficult situation to see if your spiritual cultivation is really kind of, I want to say passing muster, but you know what I mean. It's kind of like
mature.
Doing what?
Mature.
Thank you. Yes, that's a better word. Again? Debenyomo. Yeah. So in the case of non-Buddhist traditions, they would see from putting themselves in their situations that the afflictions related to the desire realm, right, which is their object of abandonment, the afflictions related to the desire realm were kind of like, barely present, and in this way they know they cultivate it. So for the meditator, right, for the yogi or the yogini, what they need to do is not just bring forth those minds during meditation, but outside of the meditation, at a certain point, they're supposed to go into the town, go into the village, put themselves around those their objects of attachment, around their objects of aversion, and see how well they've done with subduing the afflictions.
Take me and Logi Mombo Yare, me and Tamoshi Saravas, can do a seral and do no Gajela. Tachoros Tasitoshan, Angaro, Dujano, things at Democazia.
So, we see that, like, as beings become more advanced in this practice, right, they want to challenge themselves in this way. So, Geshe-la was saying that, that he shared the story before, but it's relevant here that when His Holiness the Dalai Lama was giving the Tamden Yangsang, the most secret Hayagriva empowerment at Serajay Monastery. It was at the time where they were doing their debate exams. So he asked the monks who were debating to come very close to the seat where he was going through the rituals to give the initiation, because he said, I want you to debate very loudly so I can check my concentration, right? So there's many ways, right, where we can put ourselves in situations to determine the level of our practice. It's really just a practical thing, right? Like, so if we're cultivating the antidotes to attachment or anger, put yourself near that object or person that arises attachment, or near that situation or person who arises your anger, and then try to cultivate the antidotes to that attachment and anger, and see how that's working or not, right? You can figure this out just using kind of a practical method like that. And so, these are also kind of ways of gauging one's practice that non-Buddhist religious traditions use as well. Kin. So in terms of these kind of non-Buddhist systems of religious practice, Geshe was just commenting that the Buddha, right, before his enlightenment, he actually trained with teachers of these traditions. And one of the Buddha's teachers, he actually taught a kind of developing a renunciation for this desire realm. So the desire realm in particular, seeing that its objects were unreliable, that there was no lasting happiness to be found, and therefore to aspire to higher realms. So these were systems of practice that were present even at that time. So these are practices that Buddhism shares with these other traditions, but they're not the kind of most refined level of practice. So they're considered more for those of limited faculties. Yeah. So for example, if you there's like simple things. If you have a strong attachment, let's say, for the place or the neighborhood where you live, and that attachment is kind of something that's troubling you, then you start to develop an awareness of the faults, the drawbacks to that place where you live. And you think about other places that might have superior conditions. So it's a very similar practice to that. It's also, you can use this also for objects, for things, nice things that you may be attached to, right? These are all kind of easy things to cultivate in terms of reducing that mind of attachment. Yeah, so it's kind of through experimenting in this, right? Kind of seeing what's arising in the mind, cultivating that antidote, and in this way being able to reduce those troubling minds. But of course, His Holiness says don't spend too much time on practices such as this. If you really focus on developing your understanding of emptiness, this will actually pacify these problems. It's kind of a panacea in a way. But for us, that approach, which is for the sharp faculty disciples, maybe that approach just with emptiness is a little bit challenging. So it's also good to know about these other tools that we can also cultivate in these daily situations. So if we think about the antidotes of anger, for example, which some of them are love and compassion, we can see very practically that when love and compassion are prominent within the mind, it makes it very difficult for anger to arise, right? That's just a practical reality. But to get rid of the complete traces of anger so that it can never arise again, as powerful as love and compassion are, they won't be able to do this. We need a penetrating insight into reality, so we need to develop that wisdom realizing emptiness. So I think we've explored that question fully. So are there any other questions, Dave?
Go ahead, Rebecca.
I was wondering about laziness. One of the things that is important in doing the practices is to not have laziness.
Yes, yes. So Rebecca, are you seeking comment from Geshe just about like how to reduce that laziness?
Yes.
Yes, okay, all right. Nanso chita nanso nyamlen chege na ruwa tene lelo serie di barche so chikre duas. Tene lelo barche so insang lelo di khandes nyungru thangores ruwa barche di khandes samlu thangores.
다 lelo mewa zoyal ta te ramanda yorwas. Ane shato pena soso toja yashu karatsu na tig pe kaze sono tona. Ota lelo nyondo ha kwaji yares.
So the first one is actually the first kind of method that we can use to decrease or to get rid of our laziness is to think about the benefit of the practice that we're doing, of the cultivation or the mind that we're trying to develop. As we become convinced of the benefits, that will help to reduce laziness. And actually, once we become thoroughly convinced of the benefits of what we're trying to develop, we can kind of happily cultivate it. Laziness won't so much enter.
다용에서 서게 내절라 소바 코와시 내절라 소바 던지 몸보 지소노 도게들라
코와시스나
코와시도 거의 그녀다
yeah.
어다 대지 소소던 대화 요바지 통소나 드니요 콜레로 롬메바 과야지 거 야레스.
Another thing that's really important as an antidote for laziness is actually to meditate on the suffering. Specifically, the suffering on the three unfortunate realms of existence can be very helpful, and also to really develop a contemplation and a deep conviction of the faults of samsara, right? If we develop a deep conviction of the faults, the disadvantages of samsara, this will kind of naturally bolster us and help us to dispel laziness.
소소가 시와 시민에서 대지 제소나 어다 대지 우슈 침뭐 배나 맞지 말해서 대요나 농서 야 로가다 왔던 이거 슈 건서 슈치 벌레가 지기 알았어. Pena so much deona leles deona
yeah
shawashimene selji tesona
kewajema
nipala tene ya loga
also just becoming really convinced of the reality of future lifetimes, and that if we want them to go well, we need to do something about that. It's said that if one can really develop a conviction of future lifetimes, it's almost like that person who, if they're sitting down and thinking about the reality of those future lifetimes, they'll immediately have to get up and start doing some kind of practice. That's the kind of urgency that helps develop.
어다 때때때지 시에게 차니 지에서 노토니 달레로 가야지 예때게 더 토자르지가 배제내라 어떻게 가야지 lon간이 인도와스.
So it's really, there are two paths to decreasing our laziness. The first is thinking about faults or disadvantages, for example, of samsara, suffering, and so forth. And the second one is through thinking of the benefits of the minds that we're trying to develop through our study and practice.
Yeah, so
we see many of the holy beings, it was like they didn't even have time to sleep, right? So there are examples of kind of practitioners like that, like they cultivated these antidotes to laziness so thoroughly. But that is not for us beginners. Remember, in the text it talks about the power of rest or the power of relinquishment. For us as novices, this is essential. Because long term, we need a healthy body, a body that is able to be relaxed but also focus. Gonda nganso ludi yabogo gires
Seshiu the lido seta lele chen shawa tempo go ya ite kol karga nikala eju ya bo chitni tsendi tempo chen do was.
So if we take care by getting enough rest of our body and we take care of developing our mind, we'll have the perfect basis to bring forth the joyous effort that we need for success in our spiritual practice.
Ore ma to shiwa tomba tig tenza kale jane tenza shido tanga teso gi sa te le tombi kan te ta re ga mares.
Otherwise, we might look at those holy beings who engage in really arduous practice and never sleep, and we'll think that I need to do like that. But actually, we need to look at our situation. We are not at the same level. It's essential to remember that because we need to work according to our own present circumstances.
Pena sonji ta te chi chen ne chen bo res. Sonji go lotri kawashi esen kale mo ja do was.
Kawashi,
Lotri go ja kale mo ja.
yeah.
Ar kada ya ta che shiwa tomba mo chi te lu do ne. Aro so te no ji do gar sang zo ke je mo shi ga was.
And so also trying to beyond what we're capable of can sometimes be detrimental. And actually there's a part of the Buddha's life story that the Buddha manifested to teach us this, which is that we know that for 6 years he engaged in arduous ascetic practices because his companions were saying, this is the way that we practice, we don't take rest, we eat this poor food, so this is how to get liberation. So the Buddha practiced in that way.
Kepari chi ke te garo mare. So ji there is a lot to kale ja hale te so no ji ganzo so ga mare singa zo ki bo chen rai are se.
Yeah. And so later some people were saying as followers of the Buddha, maybe we also have to go through those 6 kind of years of ascetic arduous practice, but one scholar said no, actually the Buddha did that so that we don't have to show us that we don't need to. In fact, we can pick up right from after that period where he practiced the middle way and was able to practice happily.
So ji lot kawashi kale ja ga te kala ni koro senje yimbi ta senje yimbi kala pamani la tor pa te kange chi la te ne pamani la kange chi te bel kange chi te bel
na so kawaya tanda sange rangi kyores ngumagi
soji ro senje yimbi ka yo wa
senje yimbi ka pa
ngama senje ro wa
kyewa nguma da wuce
te ngama te mai na
ale los kyewa nguma la na ti
te ngama la ya soji shang ngama je wa senje so senje yimbi kala pamani la kange chi te bi loji chi wa res
ko puku kapala pala amala
kange se na senje yimbi kala
ale los pala amala kange che so
o ta tile ala tin lotu kale ja ga te
So there's another explanation for why the Buddha engaged in the 6 years of arduous ascetic practice, and it is said that one of his previous lifetimes, right, before the current rebirth, he had caused a lot of suffering to his parents, to his father and his mother. So that 6 years of arduous practice acted as kind of way of clearing away the karmic remnants of that.
But for
us, the Buddha opened a path that we can start right now, happily, right, according to our circumstances, practicing love and compassion according to our daily lives. Yeah. So in order to be able to practice this love and compassion and so forth, it doesn't require an arduous ascetic approach that, causes tremendous suffering to our body and our mind.
However,
it does require a stable, joyous effort. So we need to take care of ourselves and develop those conditions and that understanding to bring forth that continuous, joyous effort.
The
most important thing is that the effort that we do bring forth is supposed to be steady like a stream. It's not like we go kind of really intensively into practice and then do nothing, and really intensively in practice and then do nothing. That's not going to get you where you need to go. We want to have a steady stream of regular practice, regular joyous effort. So we want to be that steady stream, that river that flows all the way to the ocean unbroken. So I think we've answered Rebecca's question. Are there any more questions?
Yes, please. There are 2 questions coming in from Facebook.
Sure.
So first one is, if everything is naturally pure and we are naturally Buddha, Why do we need to renounce?
So I'm thinking that this person is just saying this, right? Because Geshe didn't say we're naturally Buddha, did he? Did I translate that? I hope I didn't.
No, he's
It's just a general question, right? Okay, no, we're good. I just want to make sure I didn't make any errors. Nganso rang shingi nampar dakpa yena, nganso rang shingi sangye yena, dene ngenjung karichene kyegores. Nganso rang shingi konso tawadi yore ngomane sangye yopagi, nganso nangla sangye yopagi tawachi nganchena. Nganso rang shingi sangye yena, rang shingi sem rang shingi nampar dakpa yena, dene nganso ngenjung karichene kyegores.
pena doje pano re se re kenyi chunu sa de na kenyi ti sa bo chunu la de na
Yeah.
hakasarwa o ta te chwa ma zone nga zo khit ni ne se thong thong mun duas.
So let's use an example, Geshe said. If you have a diamond or a piece of gold, if it's under a heap of trash, are you able to enjoy or use that diamond piece of gold or not? Yeah. No, we can't use it if it's covered under the trash, right?
Ni ne chin phage chuma za yo ke no ba chi yar was kenyi yo ke no ba ten no ba ba chi bare.
So if we have kind of a diamond that's kind of beautifully displayed and visible, and a diamond that's underneath a pile of garbage, a pile of trash, right? They're both equal in terms of the fact that they're both diamonds, right? They both have this naturally lustrous, beautiful diamond shape.
Ta chi de za chen bo re ten pi ta bo je re ten si chi ge thong mo de si chi le chi kui ji ya bo chi ko ka ten du was.
But the diamond that's underneath the piece, all of the trash, it's not able to be seen by anybody. It's not able to kind of perform its function of bringing beauty and light, right? It's just sitting there under the pile of trash.
Ta ka si nga zo ke te ro asun te ji le chuma so na ki le ka pi ya bo che yar was.
But that's not a necessarily perpetual situation, right? If we identify that there's a diamond hidden under that pile of trash, then we slowly clear away that trash and we take the diamond out and polish it and display it, right?
Ta te ji kan ga pe re chi bare es ni re te.
So that would be Geshe-la's answer to that question.
Yo
Right?
yo dulu da ma da hale vi ni ba chu chu ko no lo sun ji ke ji yo ba ina. Hakasara ta te ji ke te re te dulu te ji ma shi na sun ji ke te te to mo duas.
There's another example about a statue of a Buddha that's hidden under piles of old cloth, right? The statue of the Buddha can't act as an object for worship or accumulation of merit if it remains kind of just hidden under all of those piles of old cloth, right? We have to remove the Buddha statue, clear away the cloth, and display it properly.
o ta ne se ten ji ya yi ta ji ji ge sun ji ni ne yo se ge ya re ta nga zo yin ta nga zo ser chum la ma zo ka pa se na so sun ji ge ta de ji de ya re ma do sun ji ru re se ge ya ma re.
So to address the second part of the question was that if we're already naturally Buddha, just to clarify, in Lama Tsongkhapa's tradition, actually, this is not our view. We don't say that we are already the Buddha. We say we have the nature of the Buddha, the potential or the basis of accomplishment of the Buddha within ourselves, but we are actually not already Buddha.
sun ji ye ne za mo ge sun ji ru chi se yo se pe ja no le ten yo ya was.
So there are some sutras and other texts that say, do not seek the Buddha outside, the Buddha is within yourself. So how do we understand those texts then?
ta te ting ji nga zo ta nga zo se chim ma de ten ya de ya ri ji ge se na ta te o sun ji ge de ji de ru chi se yo de ji.
Jubju. Yeah. So we understand that the basis for accomplishing the Buddha is within ourselves, right? The causal thing that we need to develop to become a Buddha is within ourselves. Therefore, we don't need to seek outside. That's how we would understand that.
o ta te che ba mo de ten da ten ji re ta ge ten no ji ge ni ji pe yo de ba yin na ta ti ka ge ten de te yo was.
So the point is, if the natural purity of the mind, or if the natural enlightenment is covered under the defilements, under the afflictions, it can't benefit us. So just like with the example of that diamond or the gold, we need to clear away the trash to reveal it.
ta ge ni de le la wo ji re mo duas ko ta pe shi ko ba pa ten ge che wa ja zhuang mo mo ko ba yo yi za ta de le ngin ju pi zhe ba je de xie ni la.
But if we're talking about garbage as an analogy for the afflictions, it's not easy just like clearing away like trash in this world, but the afflictions are something that are present with a heavy layer of habituation. And because of our habituation to those afflictions, we need to bring forth definite emergence or renunciation to really effectively be able to clear those afflictions away.
This way.
So hopefully, I think that was a Facebook question, so hopefully that answered, but whoever it was is welcome to come back. So there's an extensive explanation of this in the Ju Lama, in the Uttara Tantra Shastra, especially in the explanation of the Tathagata lineage. So you can look there for more information.
And then last question is, did His Holiness the Dalai Lama's surgery imply cuts and loss of blood with transfusion?
I don't know how we would know that, but I'll ask Geshe-la. I'm not privy to that, but maybe Geshe-la knows something I don't. Again, the konso Jawa Rinpoche pemo chashe soya di konso mi jenda gitra kusuk nangla lu goya dang kundungi kusuk di sha nangla chashe so goya chigres di hakogirebes. Geshe-la has no information about how the procedure was performed, so he can't answer that. He's sorry. He trusts that they chose the very best possible skilled doctors, but he's not an expert in how the surgery is performed, so he doesn't know. He hasn't heard anything, at least. But he did hear that the surgery went very well. You know, that statement was released to the public. Yeah, so you know, really also rejoicing that the doctors were able to serve His Holiness in this way, and you know, able to kind of accomplish the surgery successfully. So it was said that, you know, of course there's some discomfort initially, but from what Geshe-la heard, His Holiness was able to leave using a walker already, just, you know, so shortly after the surgery. So it's probably a good sign.
Great. That's it.
All right, if there's nothing further, we shall leave it there, and enjoy the rest of your long weekend, everybody. As I said, next weekend, Geshe-la and myself are away, but Dave is going to lead a sadhana of the inseparability of Avalokiteshvara and the spiritual teacher for His Holiness's birthday, and then the following week we are back in action. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care.
Ya tu che kanga kibo tashi dele kanga.
Thank you.
Tashi dele.